Okay, everyone, welcome to today's show. This is going to be a really interesting episode because, this whole podcast started because I felt as though we're not getting the true history, the true science, the true education. And so the gentleman, his name's John Hamer. He's a British historian and independent researcher known for questioning mainstream historical narratives and exploring how history may have been shaped or manipulated by powerful institutions. He is the author of several books, including Falsification of History, The Falsification of Science, Titanic's Last Secret, and RMS Olympic. His work examines hidden power structures, historical revision, the Titanic and sister ship theory, and the reliability of official records. Through his research, John encourages critical thinking and a deeper examination of accepted historical narratives. And his website is falsificationofhistory.co.uk. And I did it all in one go. There we go.
Well
Got through
done.
that all right.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, John, thank you again for coming on. And it's a real joy to invite you onto this. And I do believe as
thank
though
you.
there's many. I'm trying to connect the dots. That's what this podcast is about. I've brought on so many different guests. But what you do is you like I was listening to some of the shows that you've done. You spent a lot of time like aggregating it all and doing a lot of that dot connecting already, right? And that's the
Yeah,
basis of your work and your background, right?
that's right. Yeah, I mean, I kind of well, when I describe myself, I say that I'm kind of a jack of all trades and master of none. In the truth movement, there are lots of people who just concentrate solely on one particular topic, where I try and look at the bigger picture and bring it, as you say, bring it all together. So yeah, that's where I'm from.
Yeah.
But
So
I
you,
don't particularly major in anything apart from, I think, something you're going to mention, and that is the Titanic, which I researched for about 3 years, about 15 years ago. So yeah, I mean, I regard myself as and it sounds very arrogant, but I regard myself on the foremost um, person in the UK on the truth about what really happened with Titanic. Because, like I say, I spent 3 years researching it. So
and if it's okay, I'd love to go like that can be our little
yeah,
deep dive during the show if that's okay.
sure, of course, yeah,
Because that's a really interesting one for me. And I've heard some theories about that, but I really want to know what your research is on that. I think that'd
sure,
be great
yeah,
for
yeah, no
everyone.
problem.
Before we do, I would love to know, you know, the falsification of history. I think that's where I'd like to start off with. And you know, even just the term falsification, the phrase falsification of history, like what does that really mean and where did that come from for you?
Yeah. Well, I started researching about 30 years ago. I won't go into bore you with all the details about how I got into it, but suffice to say, I did. And I found myself going down lots of different rabbit holes. Once you open up one rabbit hole, it's got so many branches on it, you go in all kinds of different directions. And yeah, the falsification of history is pretty simple, really. It's as it says, history has been falsified for millennia, literally millennia, by the prevailing powers that shouldn't be, that I like to call them, for their own expedience. I mean, the thing is that I mean, going back to very very basics, and just for those people who are watching who don't kind of appreciate this, um, governments have no power at all. Governments are controlled by a very shady set of people, a few thousand people who run the world, basically, and governments are just puppets. And the only way that those few thousand people, this is put in a very small nutshell, the only way that those few thousand people can control the alleged 8 billion of us is by falsifying certain events so that their narrative ties in with their overall agenda moving forward, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, the falsification of history is what they do. They're very good at it, and it's very believable what they do to most people, but not to people like us, of course. But that's another
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So yeah, the falsification of history. I also write about the falsification of science, which are obviously very broad topics. But I've written books on various different topics within those topics, if you like. So
Mm.
yeah,
No,
10 books altogether.
yeah, that's a vast bit of research you've done there. And so what we're saying here is that these people, I don't know whether you talk about the 13 families or whatever, or I don't know how far up the
Well,
chain it goes, but
yeah,
but is it so the case so they basically operate and it kind of trickles down, the power trickles down, and then it's like you
yeah,
say, the puppets are in the government. They're not really in control of the
no,
countries, right?
no.
And so these people I'm guessing they have their tentacles all around the world, and
Totally,
then
totally, everything.
is the idea that then when you see these wars occurring, is the kind of the kind of the meta narrative, the kind of the real agenda behind it? Is it they're trying to displace people that are going off script, they're going rogue, and they're trying to get these people into their network? Is that what it is?
Yeah, absolutely that. Yeah, I mean they have a specific agenda, as I
Hmm.
said. That agenda is manifold. There's lots and lots of different branches to it. But the ultimate goal of them, if you like, is to subjugate every person on the planet. Because as I say, a few thousand people can't control 8 billion, and they're terrified of us. So they have to come up with this narrative that kind of controls us. And people may have noticed that as time has gone on, that control is getting tighter and tighter and tighter with different technologies that come along. For example, now if you go to the Schengen area, the EU area, if you like, you've got to provide your biometrics now to go from outside the Schengen area into the Schengen area. That's just one tiny, tiny example. So when I go on holiday this summer, for the first time, because it only happened in October, I believe, I'm going to have to provide all my biometric details, as will everyone else. And this is just a small way in which they control us, but there's lots and lots of other ways. And things are getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter because this is how they survive, and they try to shut us down. People who speak out, the truth movement, they shut us down in every way possible. By censorship, internet censorship, you name it. All their entire goal is to maintain their power structure and keep us under their thumbs. So yeah,
Do you think that, because I've noticed that as well, like things are getting much tighter and there's more
yeah,
technological guardrails, things trying to hold us down, right? Do you
yeah,
think that is because I don't want to go too new, I don't want to sound new age or spiritual or anything like that, but I do almost feel as though people are waking up to a lot of these things. And I think when they do tighten things, that actually has the effect of waking people up as well. Like 9/11 had a big wake up
yeah,
effect on a lot of the moderates, I call them.
yeah,
COVID had a big effect on my moderate friends are now seeing everything that we're talking
yeah,
about on this show. They're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Wow, John, I'm like seeing all the stuff, the sprays, the spraying, and the fluoride, and
yeah,
they didn't before COVID. So it's almost as if they're playing a risky game by
yeah,
tightening the control because they know that that's almost like a sharpening effect on the human mind. I think.
yeah. Absolutely, John. That's very well put, actually. Yeah, I do public speaking as well as writing and researching and podcasts, and I go all around the country. I've got a tour by the by. I've got a tour coming up in Devon in a couple of weeks. I've got a week
Mm.
speaking tour down there. But what the point I'm trying to make is inevitably people will come up to me afterwards and say, oh, when did you wake up, John? I only woke up with COVID, or I only woke up with Brexit or something. So, yeah, very, very recent events have definitely turned more people towards the truth movement than away from it. And yes, these people do. They hate it. They want to shut us down in every way they possibly can, and that's why they tighten all this stuff up constantly. Yeah,
Yeah, and like what I don't want to put a number on it or anything like that, or just proportionally. Would you say that everything that we're told is a lie? Because I think in your book you were saying it was like the rat poison metaphor or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but it was something
yeah,
like
that's
when it
up.
comes to TV propaganda, the way it works is actually they give you like the travel news, which they're not really going to lie about. The sport news, they can't
Yeah,
really make that up because there's all these people watching in the stadium. But then they'll just seed in that little lie, and because you've built up that compliance momentum, then
yeah,
you'll just believe them that last 5% or whatever it is. But do you think that
yeah.
is that the model that they use for telling us what goes on in the scientific world in history, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're right. All the trivial stuff like sport and,
Yeah.
incidental bits of gossip and celebrity nonsense. Yeah, I mean, they probably do make some of it up, but they're not really interested in that. It's the bigger picture. It's historical events. It's mainly current events, and it's they use shall we say, deceptive tactics to fool us into believing that black is white, for example. So yeah, and I've forgotten the original question, so
Yeah,
you
no,
have
it's
to
just it
forgive
was just
me.
no, it's all right, no, it's fine. It's just like, when they're seeding in those lies, that
Yeah.
deception, they're kind of wrapping it in loads of truths that we know are
Oh,
true.
I
So
see.
so
Yeah.
so so they
Yeah.
get us on board, they get us on side of saying, well,
Yeah,
I know that's true. I watched that football game. I was there. I know that's the travel
yeah,
history's
yeah,
got to be correct. But then they just seed in that little line. So
yeah,
you've believed them up to that point. So you think, well, I'm going to believe them
yeah.
all the way.
Yeah, the quote that you mentioned earlier from my book, from Falsification of
Yeah,
History, is that propaganda is like rat poison.
yeah,
95% of it is good and wholesome. It's the other 5% that will kill you. And
that's it.
that's exactly the principle that they work on. A
Mhm.
lot of what they tell you is the truth. And as you say, they slip in lies, big lies here and there, which overall is taken as the truth then. So, yeah, absolutely spot on.
Would you say that actually, the bigger the lie, the more people believe it? Is that just a kind of a throwaway line, or do you actually think there's some truth in that?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of truth in it, but I think overall it's kind of it's a bit of a glib statement, really. I think it's
Yeah,
a bit of a
okay.
meaningless statement. It was used against, was it Goebbels,
Hmm.
or Hitler, one of the two. I can't remember which. Yeah, saying that the bigger lie, the more likely people are to believe it. I think it's a condensed version of the original truth, but
Mm.
I'm not so sure that is true. I mean, look at, you mentioned it already, the years 2020 to 22.
Yeah.
What that big event that happened then, and I won't mention it because I don't want alarms going off at
Yeah.
YouTube HQ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I've got
but
one
yeah,
strike
I
at the
mean, that
moment,
was
so
a massive, massive lie, wasn't it? And that woke people up. So it's not necessarily strictly true, John. Yeah, no, not in every case.
well, but that would just bolster what I'm saying though, is that they can what if that, you know, viruses don't exist? I don't want to go trigger YouTube here, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying that people wouldn't then question it because it's just like, how could they possibly lie about that? It's just that's part of it though, is it not? To
Exactly. This is one of the major principles that they work on, and the idea that yeah, it's kind of contradicting what I said before, but they do this.
Mm,
They it's like Hollywood. They present us with this stuff that is presented as fiction, but really knowing that it's fact. And what that does, it allows them to get away with it
hmm.
because people think, oh, if you try and mention it to someone and say, oh, did you know, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, that was just a film, whatever film it might have come from, They do it all the time. But yeah,
Mm.
I'm getting off the point again,
Well,
but yeah,
you
what you
get
say.
truth in movies and lies in the news, but then they've
Yeah,
still broadcasted it, so then they've already
yeah,
told you, so there's something going on
yeah.
there in terms of consent, I
And
guess.
just as an aside, John,
Yeah,
sorry to kind of
yeah, that's
derail
all
the
right. No,
conversation a little
please.
bit. My latest two books with a co-author have been novels. Okay, and then
Mm.
because we had the idea that it's kind of like playing Hollywood as its own game in effect, right? We've told the truth about Antarctica in these two books, but we've dressed it up as fiction. So people who wouldn't normally read that, they would just dismiss it as some silly conspiracy theory, will read that because they believe that it is just fiction, whereas it's actually full of truth bombs,
Yeah.
not just about Antarctica, but about all sorts of other different stuff as well. So yeah, it's kind of playing them at their own game. Because
See,
yeah,
that's interesting, John, because I did a fiction writing course, and one of the things that they said, that the teacher said, was that
yeah,
when you start writing fiction, it will actually, a lot of your own psychology will start to come out, and you'll start to understand yourself deeper, on a deeper level, because
right,
it's almost like you're unknowingly dredging out parts of the parts of you that haven't been healed yet, and all this stuff's coming out on paper, and it's
right,
almost purge, it's coming out. But there's also something to be said for, putting these truths into fiction so that when people read it, it actually goes in on a deeper level, because it's going into their
absolutely,
unconscious level. I think, mate, that's
yeah, that's
that's the
spot
game they're
on.
playing on us. So
Yeah,
we're kind of doing it back
definitely.
on them, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the idea. Yeah.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
so that's what you're working on at the moment, is it? You've got a couple of novels coming out.
Yeah, well, yeah, the latest one was published last month. The first one was called 60 Degrees South,
Uh-huh.
and that's based on the idea that you're not allowed to travel beyond 60 degrees south, and which is absolutely true. You're not.
Yeah.
There is something called the UN Antarctic Interceptor Force, which will turn you back if you try and go under your own steam, either by plane or by ship. And if you don't turn back, the consequences are
Mhm.
rather dire, shall we say? And people say to me, "Oh, well, that's not true, John. I've been to on an Antarctic cruise." And yeah, you definitely have. You've been in that region, but you've not been to
Right.
Antarctica. Where you've been to is the Antarctic Peninsula, which is 62 degrees south. And even then, it's very, very strictly controlled. You're not allowed to go inland. You can just go to the edge of Antarctica and only on a guided trip. You cannot do it under your own steam. So, yeah, and the book is about
Mm.
why, what, our speculation as to why, what the hell is going on there. Yeah,
So
and
you
then there's
actually,
a sequel to that. There's a sequel to it,
yeah.
and there's a sequel to the sequel in the pipeline at the moment. So yeah,
Okay, so you did actually, it's basically telling exactly the accounts of what goes on then, but just wrapped in
yeah,
fiction,
yeah,
right?
wrapped in
Okay,
fiction. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
clever. Yeah, I like that. So what do you, can we just stay on that for now? Because I don't think I've ever had a conversation about that on my channel before,
All
but
right, okay, yeah,
like,
sure.
did you, okay, so what got you into that, the Antarctica, and did you read the stories of Admiral Byrd and,
Yeah,
yeah?
that was basically it. And
Uh-huh.
then the guy who ended up being my co-author, is a fellow Yorkshireman. He contacted me out the blue just over 2 years ago and said, I've got an idea for a novel. Would you be interested? And at that point, I'd already been thinking about doing that. So it was really opportune. And because one of my friends had been saying to me, you should write a novel, play them at their own damn game, John.
Mm.
And I'm going, yeah, okay. I've got so much on, I can't, yeah. But anyway, so Andy, co-author, he contacted me, and it pitched the idea to me, and I just thought, yeah, let's do it. So it just
Mm.
developed from there. It absolutely mushroomed and blossomed, and yeah, and it's just we've just been blown away by the reviews.
Yeah.
Everybody absolutely loves it, and
What and
it's
so how deep down the rabbit hole did you go in the research for that then? Did you
yeah, we did a lot of research. Like you say, Admiral
yeah,
Byrd was one thing.
yeah.
Um, the history of Antarctica, going back, and the history of the maps of Antarctica was very, very revealing. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that I don't believe that Antarctica is a continent.
Mm.
I just think it's an ice barrier that circles the entire Earth, and there are lands beyond it. I really have been convinced by that. I wouldn't have said that if you'd asked me 2 years ago, but since the research that I've done, really
Yeah.
in-depth research, I believe that they're covering something up down there, something really important. What could it be? And it's definitely not protecting mineral deposits, and it's definitely not protecting the bloody penguins. So, which is what they tell us. So, what is it? And actually, there is a map which we put in the forward in the book,
Mhm.
that hangs in believe it or not, this is absolutely true, that hangs in the UN lobby, the lobby of the
Absolutely.
UN building in New
Look,
York,
yeah.
and it shows the Earth as we know it in
Yeah.
a little corner down the bottom there, and then around it there are hundreds, not hundreds, that's an
Mm.
exaggeration, John, dozens of other continents and oceans beyond that. So is that what they're hiding? Well, that's speculation, of course, but this is what we base the book on. The fact that they are hiding that.
Well, if you just go onto the flag, the United Nations flag itself, it's
Exactly.
basically showing you, is it not? Like in a simple form?
Yeah, it is.
You know,
It doesn't show the continents beyond Antarctica,
no,
but it shows the flat Earth map, for want of a better description of it.
right. Yeah.
Gleason's map, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
I think I know it's a hard one for people, but it's you've got to start suspending your existing belief systems. That's the only way you're going to create paradigm shifts. Like, Thomas Kuhn's work, I think his book was something, it was called The Paradigm Shift or something like that. But he talks about anomalies start bubbling up in the current paradigm, and then questions get answered, and then there's a displacement, and then it's not a gradual thing. It's almost like a kind of sometimes the
Yeah.
complete opposite. So that's
Yeah.
maybe why people need to start looking into that a bit more. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but I've often thought that the what we're living on is very similar to an eye. If you think about the eye, so you've got, the iris would be like the land mass, the North
Yeah.
Pole is like the pupil, and then the what we'd say here in this model here, we're talking about the Antarctica ring around that's like the white of the eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like that. That's what I see it
Yeah,
as.
it's a good analogy, that, actually. Yeah.
I've
Absolutely
often
agree.
I've often thought that. But so I mean,
Mm.
should we go there? I mean, what have you have you considered about the ball Earth and the flat Earth, or are you trying to avoid that because it's sort of a bit of a stigma?
I, and it's not that I avoid it. I have my own views on it, but
Mm,
I'm not 100% convinced
yeah.
either way. I tend to think that maybe, and again, it's only a maybe. I'm not stating this as an absolute fact. Maybe the Earth is just a lot bigger than they tell us.
Mm,
And for whatever reason, they don't want us to venture beyond that Antarctic ice wall. Um, yeah,
I know.
it's only my own personal speculation. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, for anyone who thinks I'm a bit of a flat Earth nutter, there is a lot of evidence to say that the Earth is not a sphere. There is a lot, because about I
Mm,
think it was about 10 years ago, I actually tried. I thought flat Earth nonsense.
mm.
I'll disprove it. So I did a lot of research on it, and it had the opposite effect. Really, it made me consider that it's possible that it isn't, but can't be sure because even though there is lots of evidence for it, there is some, not as much, but there is some evidence that it is not flat. But this is
Absolutely, yeah.
why I tend to believe that it's perhaps bigger than
It
they
could,
actually
it
tell
could,
us.
it could be just it's like thousands of times bigger. That could be the thing,
Yeah, it could be.
right? Yeah, that could be the thing as well. Because I've looked
Mm.
into it as well, and it's difficult to say, but I mean, I've often thought it could even be shapeless. I know that sounds crazy, but a little bit like if we're in a simulation, a dream doesn't have a shape to it. It's actually being simulated and created with your consciousness as you walk through the
Yeah,
dream. And I'm just
yeah,
wondering, where there's a lot of theory on quantum theory and the double slit experiment about how the power of observation changes the
yes,
physical reality. So I
absolutely.
think the world that we're living in is
Schrodinger's cat and all that. Yeah,
yeah, so I think the reality isn't just 100% physical. I think as humans, we are almost energizing and animating this construct, through intention and through our consciousness. That's just my own personal opinion. I'm not fixed on that, but it's just a thought experiment
yeah.
that actually,
No,
what
no.
if there's not a globe or a flat? It's actually just shapeless and it's like a dream where there's no boundaries to the dream. You're just moving through, and as you're walking through, it's animating every step along the way. I don't know, but anyway,
No, no.
yeah,
I mean, I'm
yeah,
absolutely. I'm not saying I totally agree with that, but I
yeah.
don't disagree with it either. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows what the real truth is?
Yeah, I'll just try and, I think the best way is to stay flexible and not be too rigid and calcified in
Exactly.
any one position so that you can always traverse into when new bits of data come your way,
Exactly.
I think it's the
Yeah.
best way to do it. So yeah, I mean, I've gone through, the stuff that you've gone through in your book. I mean, you've covered so many, you're very broad, you've covered a lot of
Mm.
ground here. But I think it'd be nice just to drill down on one topic. And I think this is where you're a bit of an expert on, I think that's the Titanic, right?
Yeah.
So could you tell me what got you into that and what your understanding is of the official story and then what you found out?
Yeah, well, I think everyone knows the official story, to be fair, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did I get into it? Well, I'd always been fascinated by this story ever since childhood. I mean, it just seemed so surreal and unbelievable to me because it's got every element you can imagine of a typical adventure story, a disaster, a Hollywood disaster, if you like. It just fulfills every category. There's disaster, there's rich versus poor, romantic stories, last minute rescues of certain people, not everybody, obviously. And it kind of just it and that is why it is like that. It's because it's designed to be like that. This Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet version, the latest Titanic blockbuster movie from the late 90s. Most people believe, I'm not saying the actual story, but the events that happened as regards to what happened to the ship and blah blah blah. Um, People believe that that is the truth. Okay, I'm not saying everyone does, but a lot of people believe that that is the truth. But yeah, just to go back to the best way to tell the story, if you don't mind, is just to tell it chronologically because it is a fairly complex story. And just to give you an idea, I once did a 4-hour podcast on it and didn't cover everything.
Oh well.
So, so right, this just gives you an idea of how
Yeah.
complex the story is. So the best way to tell it, if you don't mind me doing so, is hogging the limelight for a bit. I mean, I don't mind you chipping in and asking
No, you go
questions.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just tell it, and it will take a little while. But
Mm.
to give you the background to it, I researched it 2010 to 2013, and I looked at there were two inquiries after the event, the American inquiry, which came first, and the British inquiry. So I've looked at all the transcripts of those. I've looked at Harland and Wolff public records. Harland and Wolff were the shipbuilders who built the Titanic and its sisters in Belfast. I've looked at various archives in libraries, contemporary newspaper records in libraries, obviously the internet, which is heavily censored now. And I also looked at the Marconi wireless transcripts. What I mean by those are, in those days, the wireless operators on the ships, and wireless was a very new thing at the time of the Titanic disaster, but the wireless operators on the ships at that time weren't employed by the White Star Line, which was the line that owned Titanic. They were employed by Marconi. So the transcripts of the Marconi wireless conversations that were going on in the North Atlantic at that time, at the time of the disaster, they're not available on the internet. They're only available at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, which is where I spent 2 days trawling through them. So yeah. So as I say, there's a lot to relate. So just to set the scene, the incident happened at 11:40 p.m. on Sunday, the 14th of April, 1912, and the ship sank approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes later, local time. And strangely enough, this official story that everybody thinks they know, it actually comes from a book written by a guy by the name of Walter Lord, who was a CIA agent in the early 1950s, and that book was called The Night to Remember. And a few years later, they made a feature film of it, and that was the image. Those are the memories that people have of what the Titanic story really is. But to me, when I started researching it, that kind of begged the question: why was a CIA agent writing a story about a shipwreck 40 years earlier and distorting all the facts? Because that's exactly what he did. It was all rather strange to me, and my research bore that out. So, going into the story, there are two actual strands to it. In 1908, J.P. Morgan, whose name still exists in the company that bears his name, the financial organization, he was head of a huge conglomerate corporation of the same name at that time, and which eventually became the J.P. Morgan that we know and love today. And he was also the ultimate owner of the White Star shipping line. Now, he decided to build 3 luxury liners with a mandate of becoming the most luxurious in the world. And these were RMS Olympic, RMS Titanic, and RMS Britannic in that order. So there were 3 ships to be built, almost but not quite identical. And he commissioned Harland and Wolff Shipyard in Belfast to begin construction in 1908. Now, the key element to this is that it needed a massive investment of money, and this was financed by J.P. Morgan personally, and it was a huge gamble. The plan absolutely depended on absolutely everything going right, but as we'll see, the whole enterprise was actually beset with lots of problems, which ultimately ended in tragedy. So RMS Olympic was the first of the sisters to be built, and that was launched in 1911. And then, unfortunately for Morgan, she had several serious accidents, 4, in fact, all before the launch of Titanic. So in other words, all happened in the first few months of Olympic's life. I won't go into all the details of all of them, but the 4th one is particularly significant. In September 1911, RMS Olympic, she was involved in a massive high-speed collision with a British Navy cruiser called HMS Hawke. And this is known as the Hawke incident in Titanic circles, after leaving Southampton water and preparing to turn westwards, travelling clockwise around the Isle of Wight. So she limped back to Southampton to be patched up, which took 2 weeks. And from there back to Harland and Wolff for full repairs, because they had to take her back to Belfast, because the only dry dock in the world that was big enough to take her, because she was the biggest ship in the world, was in Belfast, where she'd been built. And then once they got her back, they realised that she was in far worse shape than they originally thought. And worse still, there was a Royal Navy inquiry into the accident, which found Olympic's crew and therefore White Star Line culpable. White Star Line was thus liable for many millions of pounds of expenses for repairs to both ships, plus significant loss of revenues whilst Olympic was out of action, not playing a trade back and to across the Atlantic. Now, amongst many, many other relatively minor issues, the major problem was that Olympic's keel was bent and distorted out of shape, and the repairs were estimated to cost more than to build a new ship from scratch. I actually spoke to several marine experts, and they all said the same thing, that a twisted or a bent keel equals a total wreck. So White Star now realised that Olympic was damaged beyond economic repair, and significantly that she was now uninsurable, and therefore an insurance write-off. And White Star Line had no option at that point in time but to declare her officially a wreck. And that is exactly what happened. It's documented. She was declared a wreck. And, as I say, documents prove that to be true. So, and as I just mentioned as well, because of the serious damage, she was unable to play a trade back and forth across the Atlantic to begin to pay her way. And the bankruptcy of White Star Line and Harland and Wolff at this point in time was definitely on the cards. So I believe, with lots of evidence which I present in the book RMS Olympic, that Morgan and his co-conspirators then hatched a plan to kill two birds with one stone. One, solve the White Star financial problems and remove opposition to the Federal Reserve in one simple move. And that involved patching up the wrecked Olympic as best they could, bracing the twisted keel with metal struts. Now, interestingly, when Robert Ballard, who allegedly discovered the Titanic wreck site, he actually didn't, but that's another story. He wasn't the first anyway. He was puzzled to find these struts, which of course didn't appear on the construction blueprint. Just a little aside. So the scene was set now for a remarkable and elaborate scam, and that was the switching of the identities of the two ships. The almost completed Titanic and the almost wrecked Olympic. And this fact has been corroborated by many Belfast shipworkers' families who've had the story passed down to them through their families. So how did they do it? After Olympic's accident with HMS Hawke, she spent many, many weeks in the shipyard at Belfast while Titanic was still under construction. So what they did, they changed them. Although they were basically identical, there were one or two differences, one or two minor anomalies. So they made the changes piecemeal. And the main differences in the two ships were slowly eradicated, making them as identical as possible. Although that wasn't 100% practical or viable, and that is how the plot's been discovered through meticulous research, because there are lots of photographs showing them in various stages of transition. So that's one element of that. And then on one final weekend, the last changes were made. Lifeboats, menus, letterheads, and of course the nameplates. They were carried out by a small crew of insiders, and these guys were paid about £100. Which was a year's wages to them in those days. And they were also threatened with loss of livelihood in the event of their speaking out about it in any way. So Olympic's maiden voyage was in June 1911, amidst virtually no fanfare whatsoever. Titanic was launched in December 1911, renamed the Olympic, and work continued on the original Olympic, now Titanic, to make her seaworthy enough for one dramatic final voyage. Now, there are so many conflicting photographs of the two in various stages of both official and unofficial changes that even so-called experts struggle to separate the two. But if you know what you're looking for, it's fairly easy. And of course, most photographs have no dates, and surreptitious changes were being made all the time. But in my book, RMS Olympic, I've included there a series of photographs that I do believe do prove the switch 100%. Yeah, so on Wednesday, the 10th of April, 1912, Olympic, which was now Titanic, left Southampton on its maiden voyage for New York amidst huge celebrations. And again, this is where the contemporary newspapers come in, John. Mm. I searched and searched and searched for any mention of RMS Olympic, which after all was the first one to be built, its maiden voyage, that tiny little 2 column inches maybe, that's all it was. Yet when Titanic sailed on its maiden voyage, it was splashed on all the major newspapers. It was a big, big news, and you just think, alarm bells. So yeah. Now, Interestingly, the transit crew that were responsible for the safe passage of the liner, this is the Titanic now, which had been Olympic, from Belfast to Southampton before the maiden voyage. Not a single one of those signed on for the maiden voyage. And this was at a time when there was a massive coal strike going on in the UK. Any ship crew that didn't have a job were not getting paid. You only got paid from the moment you stepped on the ship to the moment you stepped off it. If you weren't on a ship, you were not being paid. Now, these guys were desperate for work, and yet none of them signed on. What did they know? So, yeah. Now, by the time of Titanic sailing, the coal strike had been ongoing for 6 weeks. Passengers were desperate for berths. And interestingly enough, 5 days earlier, a ship called SS Californian had departed London for New York in the midst of this coal strike and shortage with no passengers, despite a huge demand for transatlantic passengers, because barely any ships were sailing at all. So if you had no passengers and no cargo, except for, interestingly, 3,000 woolen sweaters and 3,000 woolen blankets. Again, it's all documented. And in fact, even Titanic sailed only half full when there was a huge demand for places. First class passengers hoping to transfer to Titanic were only offered second class cabins. And in those days, what respecting first class passenger would lower themselves to travel second class? Well, not a lot of them. So I believe this was an attempt to keep numbers manageable. So on the evening of the 14th, the Californian, which had left Britain 5 days before Titanic, because it only had half the speed of Titanic, it stopped dead in the middle of the ice field where Titanic was due to pass shortly, and it drifted with the ice whilst keeping all its boilers fully fired. Now, 3 experienced transatlantic sea captains gave evidence at the American inquiry that it was not common practice to stop or even slow down in ice fields, except sometimes in very, very foggy conditions, as icebergs are extremely visible and very avoidable, even at normal cruising speeds. So the captain of the Californian, who ultimately was blamed for the disaster, not the White Star Line or the crew of the Titanic that was at fault, it was Captain Lord of the Californian. But he said that the reason that it slowed down was because it was too foggy to continue. And it wasn't. It was the clearest night ever on the Atlantic.
Mm.
Okay. So yeah, on Sunday the 14th of April, 11:40 local time, Titanic allegedly hit the iceberg and sank 3 hours later with a loss of 1,500 lives. Was there an iceberg? I don't even believe so. There might have been one in the vicinity, because people, to be fair, passenger reports that say an iceberg drifted past the ship, but nobody felt a collision. And Titanic's turning circle was such that it should have easily been able to spot the iceberg in good time and avoid it. Officially, it wasn't spotted until it was, quote, too late. But in reality, we know that it was seen 4 miles away, which, of course, is all rather strange. Now, all the ice on the decks, we know there was ice on the decks, could easily have been as a result of the shaking loose of large amounts from the miles of overhead rigging and wiring. For example, the wireless aerial ran the whole length of the ship, a long wire, and that would have been covered in ice because the conditions were freezing. And at the point of impact, the alleged impact, the ship's engines were thrust into reverse abruptly. So that shock, that shudder, when that happened, could have easily just loosened all the ice from everywhere. Now, the damage to Titanic was actually very strange. The steel plates had a 15 centimeter wide puncture that at some places penetrated 1.6 meters, about 5 feet, into the inner skin of the ship. And that would have needed a really bizarrely shaped ice outcrop and an iceberg to achieve that, and one that would surely have snapped off in contact with steel. I mean, ice is known to be very strong, but it's not as strong as steel, obviously. Now, also in my book RMS Olympic, I describe, this is like the second thread to the story. I describe an intrinsic connection between the sinking of the Titanic and the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank the following year. So, yeah, one of the prime movers behind the Federal Reserve plans was J.P. Morgan, and there were certain guys who were four extremely wealthy men who were totally opposed to the Federal Reserve for their own personal reasons, not through any altruism for the good of the people. And these were John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and Charles Lindbergh Sr., who was the father of the famous flyer. Yeah, I mean, they knew that the Federal Reserve Plan would mean soaring inflation and inbuilt debt, which would severely impact their own fortune. So they created a strong resistance movement on the east coast of the States, which was beginning to win the battle against the Federal Reserve conspirators. And all these men died on the Titanic, apart from Charles Lindbergh, who was given a £200 million bribe not to publish his book decrying what the results of the formation of the Federal Reserve would be. So I believe that the rich and famous were lured in great numbers to the hyped up maiden voyage, as I've just described, and by Morgan, who mysteriously failed to show at Southampton docks in time for the departure of the ship, along with around 50 of his friends and colleagues. And I believe that's how he lured Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss aboard, because they were in Europe at the time and they were desperate to get back to the States because, as I said, there was a huge coal strike. And I believe that they were personally invited by him. And yeah, so it was obviously no accident, I believe. I believe that Stanley Lord, who was captain of the Californian, was in on the plot. The Red Star Line for which he worked was also owned by J.P. Morgan. And several years previously, when I looked into the background to Lord, he'd successfully evacuated 2,000 people from a ship in under an hour. Perfect man for the job. So I believe it was the intention to save most of the passengers and allow a select few to become victims to cover up the disposal of the Federal Reserve conspirators. The idea was that the Californian would be standing by, complete with her 3,000 blankets and 3,000 sweaters to pick up most of the survivors. Right. And several passengers, interestingly enough, said afterwards, when interviewed by the press, that they'd been told by White Star Line staff that the Californian was on its way to pick them up, which, interesting, you might say, but Californian was totally incommunicado, 19 miles away with its wireless switched off and beyond visible contact. And there'd been no communication at all between Californian and Titanic at that point, or indeed ever. And, as I mentioned about, it's uncertain as to whether she actually hit an iceberg. It's possible that she was deliberately steered into one, or maybe sunk by explosives planted in the holds. We don't know that. It's impossible to say. But one eyewitness swore that it's seen a yellow funnel, what he described as a yellow funnel ship, directly alongside at the time of the incident. And this is known in Titanic circles as the yellow funneled steamer mystery. Yeah, so it was also seen in the vicinity of Titanic at the time of the sinking by crew members of the nearby Californian. And indeed, when the Carpathia was a ship that picked up all the survivors, a lifeboat was seen floating there that was a different colour and design to those of Titanic. So where did that come from? So, yeah. Even at the time, both inquiries, American and British, were widely thought to be whitewashers. No surprise there. There were no witnesses called from the passenger contingent. No witnesses were allowed to give personal evidence, strictly forbidden from speaking other than to give simple answers to direct questions. And when Captain Lord of the Californian was questioned by the press afterwards, he said, and I quote, "I am not allowed to give out state secrets. You'll have to ask those in the office." Okay, so yeah, it's all very, very strange. I mean, that is it in a very small nutshell. There is so much more to it than that, John.
Yeah.
But
4 hours.
Brief taste.
Yeah, that's a brief one. Thank you for that, Sammy. It's great. So, who was the captain of the Titanic then? Is it who we're told it is?
Edward Smith.
Edward Smith. So, you're saying that he was deliberately handpicked by J.P. Morgan. Is that right?
Yeah, he was, but I didn't mention Smith in it all. It was Captain Lord was also employed by J.P. Morgan because he was part of the Red Star Line, the Californian, the
Mm.
ship that was meant to pick up all the survivors, but there was a miscommunication of some kind, and they never actually managed to get in contact. Don't forget, in those days, wireless was very much in its infancy, and it was only Morse code. It wasn't actually physical voice wireless. It was, it was Morse code, and apparently the story went that the wireless operator on the Californian had gone to bed early, unauthorized. It just basically buggered off and gone to bed for some reason.
Mm.
So the ships were never in contact. So the Californian was sat 19 miles away from where Titanic sank, and the two ships never communicated at all.
But I thought you said they. Oh no, so they were that's where they went early, right? You're saying the California went
Yeah,
early, and it
it
had all
did.
like the blankets and stuff in there, and
Yeah,
then but so there was obviously a captain on that ship who was Lord,
Captain Lord.
Captain
Yeah.
Lord, and so they must have communicated for them to bring the blankets then. So there
Oh
wasn't.
yeah, but that was weeks before when they were arranging it all. I guess when everybody was together in the UK. It wasn't kind of done by communication. It was done the old-fashioned way by talking to each other.
Right. But so then he did actually bring the boat round, did he, to the Titanic where the Titanic was sinking to where they had the so or not?
No,
No.
no, it did, but it was much too late. By the time
Right.
the Californian realised that the Titanic had sunk, and that wasn't until the wireless
Mm.
operator woke up the next morning and started receiving Morse messages from other ships.
Mm.
They didn't even realise that the Titanic had sunk at that point because they'd nowhere been in communication up until that point anyway. So they were just hanging about in the ice field, hoping to receive some communication from Titanic that it was in the vicinity. But there never was because the wireless operator on the Californian had gone to bed.
Oh, I see what you mean. So that wasn't part of the plan then. That was just a fuck
Yeah,
up. Like, yeah, just
yeah.
okay. So they did actually want to save some lives then. That's what you're saying.
I
Why?
believe so. Yeah. I
Mm,
mean, otherwise they wouldn't have sent the Californian out with all those
yeah,
sweaters.
like what?
I don't think they wanted to
Mm.
kill everyone, but they just certainly didn't expect so many to die. That's for sure.
I'm wondering why
Because
they wanted some people to stay alive then. Why couldn't they just, you know,
sink the lot.
sink the lot?
Well, I guess they wouldn't have been able to convince the crew, because obviously the senior
Mm,
crew of the Titanic were in on it. Obviously they were,
right. Oh, I
because they
see.
told some of the passengers that the Californian was coming to pick them up. How did they know that the Californian was even there? You know,
Wow, they must have been paid a lot to go along with that because I wouldn't have trusted.
well, yeah, yeah, either bribed or coerced in some way. Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And there's so much more to it than I could tell you in
Yeah.
20 minutes or
No,
whatever it
it's all
was.
right. Yeah, no, we can keep going for 10 more minutes or something. But I was going
Yeah.
to say, so, but that liner, that it is the Olympic, right? That's the initial, but that was the original
That's the ship
ship.
that sat at the bottom of the North Atlantic now, the original
Yeah,
RMS Olympic. Yeah,
it's RMS Olympic. So it was already compromised, right? Because you said it already had the impact from the Hawk, was it?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
They
all
just patched
patched
it
it
up.
together. So is it that's probably what made it sink, is it not? Because that was already compromised.
Yeah, possibly. It certainly wouldn't have helped. There are all sorts of other kind of subplots to it as well. Like, for example, there was a
Mm.
fire raging in coal bunker number 10 for the entirety of the ship's existence.
Oh.
There was a fire raging in coal bunker 10, which could have compromised the steel. So that's a possibility. But there's so many facts that we know about, but we cannot prove that it was actually a part of the plot or
Mm.
a part of the accident. It's just not feasible to do it with such a long distance in time. There's nobody still alive, obviously, that was involved in it. So all the information that you get is kind of secondhand. But
And did Captain Smith was he saved or not?
no,
He wasn't.
well, I say
Mm.
no. Officially, no, but there are lots of reports, which again I've detailed in the book,
Yeah.
that who people claimed to have bumped into him. One of
Mm.
them in particular is a guy called Peter Pryall, who sailed with him on another ship, and he bumped into him in Baltimore about a year after the accident. And he knew it was Smith because he knew him, and Smith actually called him by name. He bumped into him at a railway station in Baltimore, and Peter Pryall went up to Smith and said, I can't remember what he said now, but Smith apparently said, "Don't bother me now, Pryall, I'm busy," something like that. So he knew who he was,
Mm.
and Pryall knew who he was. But again, we've only got someone's word for that. But apparently, the guy had no reason to lie. By that time, he'd become a wealthy man, owning ships himself and stuff. And the publicity they got from it was very, very adverse. So I can't see they had anything to gain by claiming that if it was untrue. So he was demolished by several newspapers, but he was adamant, and he even just to prove that he was perfectly sane, he even went to a doctor and got a doctor's certificate saying that he wasn't insane, because that's what people
Oh
claimed.
wow, bloody hell! Well, that's a
I
whole
know it's
rabbit hole
just
in
weird.
itself.
We'll
Yeah.
never know, but
No, we'll never know that. But so he would have probably been that bolsters the point about he was probably paid off to go along with the narrative and
yeah,
allow the ship to be sunk and then be rescued and just
yeah,
then keep a low profile for the rest of your life type of
absolutely.
thing.
And I believe
Mm.
all the senior officers, the six senior most officers, were also in on it. I reckon they couldn't have done it without them being.
Yeah, couldn't have worked without that. Yeah. Like, can you
But the
just
bottom line was, of
mm,
course, that
yeah.
saved White Star Line. It saved JP Morgan's ass as well. And it was just an insurance scam at the end of the day, because they were tell me if you've
Mm,
heard this kind of
mm,
story before.
yeah.
But what happened was, 2 weeks before Titanic's maiden voyage, JP Morgan upped the insurance on the Titanic from 2.7 million to 3.2 million. Shades of a certain event in
9/11.
2001.
Yeah, 9/11 anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm. That's the way to work out future psyops, isn't it? As soon as they do like
Yeah,
could just spot the insurance claims early on.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so what was I going to say there? So you say there were three ships, and then so there
Hmm.
was one actually called the Titanic, which was like the third ship in the sequence. So was that renamed, and was that actually brought out after?
No, no, not quite right. The Titanic, or the one that we know as Olympic,
Yeah, that's the Titanic. But I'm saying
that
you.
was that was the Titanic. But the one that was Titanic became Olympic.
Oh, I see.
So it
There's a
was
bait
the
and switch.
Olympic.
Right.
Yeah, it was the Olympic that then plied its trade back into across the Atlantic for the next 25 years until it was scrapped in 1937. And then the Britannic came a couple of years after Titanic sank, and that was actually turned into a troop ship and then a hospital ship in World War One, and that was sunk in the Aegean by a German torpedo.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Yeah,
So that was sunk. Oh, right.
yeah.
Okay. How many died on that?
I can't remember. A
Mm,
few hundred.
a few hundred. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. You don't really hear about that, do you? Like you'd have thought they'd be incorporate all the ships into the story somehow, but they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just
No, they've got to
pin.
they've got to keep they've got to keep their narrative going. Yeah,
Yeah. It actually seems similar to just to kind of go off topic slightly, but do you remember the Challenger, the NASA Challenger?
I do.
And I don't know whether you've looked into that, but
I have.
you see a lot of the people on that craft you suddenly see popping up, years later
Yeah.
with
In
ordinary
fact,
jobs and
yeah, that's right. In fact, there's a photo on the internet of all the crew of the Challenger, apart from one person, I think,
yeah.
and looking 30 years older.
Mm,
And it's obvious that them. Some of them even kept their original names. I mean,
yeah,
it's just madness, isn't it? But people are
absolutely.
so gullible. People just fall for all this stuff all the time.
I know. I mean, it's the whole NASA thing as well. I mean, does it not mean deception in Hebrew or something? I don't know, but
I don't know.
someone's looked into that. But just
Some
yeah,
people say it stands for never a straight answer
yeah,
or not a space agency.
yeah, that as well, all included. What
Yeah.
what do you make of the recent space missions?
Oh God, where do I start? Honestly, I mean, the launch date was a bit of a giveaway, wasn't it? April Fool's Day. I mean, come on, they
Yeah.
love to laugh at us. They absolutely love to laugh at us.
I just don't get how they're just so flagrant with it. I mean, you see the green screen stuff, which is quite obvious. I mean, I
Yeah,
have worked in TV. I've used a bit of green screen, but even you could just use your own discernment. You can see these are people stood up against a green screen background, and
yeah,
they've
yeah.
shown the harnesses. They've shown them dropping things. They've shown, it's almost like they've done the hairspray on some of the women to make the hair
Yeah,
stand on one end,
yeah.
and yet
It's
it's
it,
almost
it,
like they don't make much of an effort to make it believable.
well, there are some theories going around the truth movement that
Mm,
it's all done deliberately because they whether we believe this or not, this is what allegedly these people who perpetrate all this stuff, this is what they believe. They believe that it's okay to do all this stuff that they do as long as they tell us what it is that they're doing in some kind
Yeah.
of oblique way, because they believe strongly in karma apparently, and they believe that alleviates any karma that they will get from the horrendous acts that they commit. So there is an element of that to it as well, I believe.
Yeah, it goes to, as I said at the beginning, like the bypassing spiritual karma by they
Yes.
put out the truth in movies and lies in the news, but they can say that they've told you
Yeah,
because they just wrapped it in
absolutely.
fiction. That's kind of how
Yeah.
they've got away with
So,
it.
so I think that's why they leave little clues in certain things, like you can see the strings when they,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, okay, yeah. So they say, look, we did shit. It is bloody obvious. There's a harness
yeah,
there.
exactly, yeah, yeah,
I mean, look, when you look back on the moon landings now, I think a lot of people are waking up to that now, but
yeah.
it's just, I mean, it's like I used to watch a TV cartoon like Button Moon in the 80s. It's
All
like
right.
it was like a kids show where they had like a moon made out of a button, like on a bit of clothing. It's just
Okay,
just
right.
a kid show, just but I don't get how grown adults can look at that and still believe it. Is it just that so it's tied to their childhood and there's memories and their identities built around that. It's a legacy around that, and it's almost as if they were to allow that story to as a domino to fall, are they worried that it will cascade and like maybe blow open everything for them, and they'd rather keep a nice kind of
Yeah.
watertight storyline on reality? I don't know.
I
Like,
think,
what do you think?
yeah, I think there's an element to that, John. Yeah, I mean, I think that people don't like to have their illusions shattered, do they? I mean,
Yeah.
I think everybody's, I'd even include myself in that on some occasions.
Mm,
You don't like to have your illusions shattered because it's something that you've believed in all your life. So it's very hard to get past that barrier sometimes. Um, you know, uh, and people and the propaganda that emanates from the media in all its forms and social media
mm,
is just overwhelming. And so again, that is a very hard spell to break. That constant reinforcement propaganda, just like the Artemis thing this last week or so.
yeah.
Last couple of weeks. It's it you know it's done as a reinforcement of their agenda. That's why it's done. That's why they resurrect it again. And I believe it's because people are, as you just said, people are waking up to the moon landings thing. So they've got to show us that no, it was real. Honestly, yeah, we'll go back and we'll show you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Bollocks.
Yeah. I mean, this is just what I believe. I actually don't think outer space exists at all. I know that's.
No, I don't.
Oh, you
I
don't as well.
don't.
Okay. So
No.
because I think because we're shown that from a very early age, like
Yeah,
like kids' books and stuff, and then TV, Star Wars, like all these movies and like
yeah,
TV series and stuff. So that's been embedded in our consciousness to this idea that we're this tiny little speck of dust in this infinite,
yeah.
space,
I'm,
vacuum of space. But
I
if it's
agree.
if you take that away and just take out the idea that actually, what if space doesn't exist, then that changes everything in terms of what we live on.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
then actually the flat earth theory actually makes way more sense then, because if this is all that exists and it's just a realm, and there might be other dimensions operating the same physical space, but then if you take away out of space, then that removes that image of like a flat earth with like the water dripping off the sides and all that kind of
yeah,
rubbish.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then you start to think, okay, maybe this is all that exists and it's just this one plane of existence, this realm.
Yeah,
And then you
yeah, and
start then it
maybe, as we said right at the beginning, maybe it just goes on forever, or it's much, much, much bigger than they tell us. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that about outer space not existing, because I'm always a bit loath to say that, because I think people be calling for the little men in white coats,
Oh, I know, yeah. The knock on the door. Men in Black, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
give
yeah,
they
or in
give you the
black,
zap
yeah,
they give you the zap to kind of lose your
yeah,
memories and stuff like that.
yeah,
But no, thank you so much for doing that. And the Titanic stuff, that's fantastic. I really that the first
okay,
person to talk about that. But yeah, I guess the kind of the moral of the story is nearly everything we've been told, if not everything, is untrue, or
yeah,
or at least they might give you the 95, like you said, the rat poison, the 95%, and then the 5% is the turd in the punch bowl. It's like the thing that
yeah,
kind of ruins it all, right?
exactly,
But
yeah,
once you realize that history has been created by the winners, right, then that means that it's all up for grabs, I imagine, right? And then we
yeah,
have to look back
absolutely.
and question all of it, do we, or not? Or is there anything that you think we can actually say is true?
No, I don't actually. I mean, I think everything is up for grabs, and I think
Yeah.
people have to be open-minded. I come across so many people in the truth movement who
Mm.
believe this but not that, and
Yeah.
believe that but not this, and I just think, well, why? There's so many so-called truthers are adamant that the Earth is a globe. To the
Mm,
point of absolute stonewall certainty, almost. Totally unjustified in my view, but and this is the problem with the truth movement, and getting off the topic a bit,
no, it's fine.
but it's all disparate. There's no coordinate. We're all fighting little wars against each other. Oh no, I don't believe Tartaria. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. And yet, oh, I don't believe that they landed on the moon, and I don't believe that Titanic was Titanic, and
Yeah.
so everybody's got conflicting
Mm.
opinions, and I really do believe that this is engendered by the media and by the powers that be, without a doubt.
That's interesting. You actually think that they could be creating little hidden threads so that people are infighting, yeah, like infighting, so that we don't
I absolutely
unite.
do.
Okay.
I think the,
Wow.
the globe Earth versus the flat Earth thing
Yeah.
is absolutely a conscious Hegelian dialectic, if you like. Uh, you know,
Mm.
it's two opposing views, which I think they generate both. And hello YouTube, yeah,
Yeah.
they're one of the major movers in that particular department, I think. And yeah, it's everything's possible. Everything's
Everything's
possible, and it's
possible.
just about keeping an open mind.
Keep an open mind. Be, I try and say be skeptical about everything, but not too skeptical that you're rigid, but just, question everything, and
Yeah,
so that you be flexible, so you can move. You're not fixed in one particular position.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I change
Mm.
my mind quite
Yeah.
regularly on various different things that I've misunderstood in the past, or got hold of the wrong end of the stick in some way. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. I mean, that shows that you've got an open mind, I believe.
Just before we go, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned Tartary. You don't mention that in your book. Is that something that because you haven't researched it, or something you don't really feel happened?
To be fair, I've only very cursorily researched it,
Okay.
and I am very skeptical of it.
Okay.
I at the moment, I wouldn't swear that it's all nonsense, but
Mm.
that's kind of my feeling. But to be fair, I've not really properly researched it.
Hmm.
I just think there'd been far more evidence than there actually is. Could be way off beam on that. I don't know, John, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's just my current opinion. But at some point in the future, someone may show me something or present something to me that I say, "Wow, I've been an idiot all these years after all." But at this point in time, no, I
No.
I, I don't actually conform that. Um, so yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Maybe that third book, Falsification of Civilizations, or something. I don't know, in the
yeah,
future.
yeah, maybe, yeah.
All right, John. Lovely. Do you want to just mention the books again for everyone, and then I'll put the links in the description.
Yeah, my 10 books are in chronological order of being written: The Falsification of History, um, RMS Olympic, which is the real Titanic story; Titanic's Last Secret, which is a novel based on RMS Olympic. God, I'm struggling now.
Hmm.
Behind the Curtain, volumes 1 and 2. Behind the Curtain is more of a comprehensive falsification of history, based on the idea that it's the banking system that creates all this fake wealth and allows them to do all the stuff that they want to do. JFK, A Very British Coup, where I outline my theory, substantial theory, that it was uh, conducted by the British Crown. And by the British Crown, I don't mean the royal family. I mean the British Crown Empire, of which they're a part, obviously. But so there's that. And then the next one was Falsification of Science. Welcome to the Masquerade, which was a thorough expose of the years 2020 to
Mm.
2022. And then 60 Degrees South, which is the Antarctica novel; 100 Degrees South, which is the sequel, okay, because it's an
Mm.
adventure story, a rip-roaring adventure story, as they say. All those books, if you're in the UK, you can order them directly from the shop on my website. You can order signed copies from my shop on the website. If you're outside the UK, then I'm afraid Amazon's your only option. But yeah,
Brilliant. Like you've been a
thank you.
busy boy. Yeah,
Yeah, it's been
that's
a it's been a long haul,
yeah.
29 years.
Wow. And I'm guessing just is it the case that it's there's still so much more, or they say that the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know. Is that
Yeah,
the kind of the
exactly,
thing? Yeah.
exactly that. Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, I'm doomed to do this for the rest of my days, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you've gone beyond the point of no return now. You just
Yeah,
you got to keep on
absolutely.
going,
Yeah,
like Admiral Byrd. Just keep on going.
yeah, indeed.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. And maybe we can
Thank
do
you,
another
John.
show in a few months of falsification of science or something. That'd be
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Anytime, mate. Anytime.